Gaetz, the biggest firebrand inside of the House of Representatives.
You're not taking Matt Gaetz off the board, okay? Because Matt Gaetz is an American patriot and Matt Gaetz is an American hero.
We will not continue to allow the uniparty to run this town without a fight.
I want to thank you, Matt Gaetz, for holding the line.
Matt Gaetz is a courageous man. If we had hundreds of Matt Gaetz in D.C., the country turns around. It's that simple.
He's so tough, he's so strong, he's smart, and he loves this country. Matt Gaetz.
It is the honor of my life to fight alongside each and every one of you. We will save America. It's choose your fighter time. Send in the Firebrand. Welcome back to Firebrand. We're live broadcasting out of room 2021 of the Capitol Complex Rayburn Building here in Washington, D.C. There is a lot going on. The money laundering of the Chinese Communist Party into America's political system to fund the Uniparty took a major blow today. I'll be explaining how new House Speaker Mike Johnson has been really delivering in that regard and cleaning house in the Speaker's office. Had an extermination there that was necessary, and I'm glad things are going well. Also, there's money laundering going on in Gaza. A new report from the Inspector General out of USAID suggesting that the $100 million Joe Biden is sending there very well may fall into the hands of terrorists in Gaza. Who would have guessed? But the big news that we've been watching relates to the Nashville shooter and the release of this manifesto. It was immediately a source of great concern for many of us when we knew that this is someone who had been radicalized, had taken life, and had done so in the grisliest and most horrific of ways. And now we are starting to see some of the motivation that drove this person to these terrible acts. Steven Crowder on Louder with Crowder read part of the Nashville shooter's manifesto. Take a listen.
Manifesto. Dark Abyss, Death Day, March 27th, 2023. Today is the day, yes. The day has finally come. I can't believe it's here. Don't know how I was able to get this far, but here I am. I'm a little nervous, but excited too. Been excited for these past 2 weeks. There were several times I could have been caught, especially back in the summer of 2021. None of that matters now. I'm almost an hour plus 7 minutes away. Can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm ready. I hope my victims aren't. My only fear is if anything goes wrong, I'll do my best to prevent any of the sort. God, let my wrath take over my anxiety. It might be 10 minutes tops. It might be 3 to 7. It's gonna go quick. I hope I have a high death count. Ready to die. Ha ha. Signed, Aiden. Next page. Audrey. Kill those kids, 3 exclamation points. Those crackers going to private fancy schools with those fancy khakis and sports backpacks with their daddies, Mustangs, and convertibles. F you little shits. I wish to shoot you weak with your mop yellow hair. Wanna kill all you little crackers again. Bunch of little with your white privileges. You. Then we have the schedule. Death Day, 6:30, desired. It's covered by a sticky note. 7 a.m., get dressed. 7:05 to 8:55. It says, with stuffed animals plus possessions. 9 a.m., eat breakfast at home. The home is encircled in a heart shape. 9:30, pack up special belongings and backpack. Test knife core breaker, leave for Royal Range. Gear up plus setup, guns and trunk. Final videotape, leave for Covenant School. So, the schedule isn't necessarily something I need to go through in detail, but we will provide it for you.
We're back live. So Steven Crowder gets a hold of this information. He reads it. You've got all of the internet wondering whether or not this is authentic. And rather than express concern over the hate-filled rhetoric that radicalized this person in Nashville to take innocent life, you saw the local government there more worried about the leaks. So in a statement, Mayor Freddie O'Connell essentially acknowledges the authenticity of what Steven Crowder put out, but there was no rebuking of this false fiction of privilege that justifies violence. There wasn't a statement about how this radical ideology has to be confronted and rejected. No, they're worried about how Steven Crowder got the information. That's what they're most worked up about. Mayor Freddie O'Connell of Nashville: I've directed Metro's law director to initiate an investigation into how these images could have been released. That investigation may involve state, local, and federal authorities. Oh, it may involve those. How clever. Back to the mayor's statement. I'm deeply concerned with the safety, security, and well-being of the Covenant families and all Nashvillians who are grieving. This incident naturally invokes additional emotional trauma, and families or individuals who need support should reach out to professionals. What they think evokes trauma is the transparency. I think what would evoke the most trauma is if you had a dead family member, a loved one, community member, someone you cared about, to have the content that is so dangerous just go unanswered by local leadership. So I think we should be more worried about racial violence directed at people who really are innocent and who are displaying the immutable characteristic of their skin color, and whether people are being targeted for being white, black, brown, otherwise. It's horrendous, and that's what we have to reject summarily. We also have got big news on Capitol Hill. I want to go over House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan releasing a bombshell report on the censorship-industrial complex. As you know, we have been following this intersection between academia, the government, and big tech to try to shape the nature of truth online. It's one of the reasons why we ask that you subscribe on Rumble, that you turn your notifications on, that you don't exclusively rely on some of the other platforms that we broadcast on, because the censorship-industrial complex is real. So let's get into what Jordan is putting out. He says hundreds of secret reports show how the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, and the GEC, which is the State Department, Stanford, and others worked together to censor Americans before the 2020 election, including true information, jokes, and opinions. The federal government, disinformation experts at big universities, big tech, and others worked through the Election Integrity Partnership to monitor and censor Americans' speech. According to one EIP member, and again, that's the Election Integrity Project, the Election Integrity Project was created, quote, at the request of CISA. The head of the EIP also said that the EIP was created after, quote, working on some monitoring ideas with CISA. Remember, if a private entity is stood up to suggest censorship, I guess that's okay. That can be the free speech they're engaging in. But when you've got the government coaxing it and urging it along, that's where you've got a problem. So back to Jordan's tweets. He says, here's how it worked. EIP stakeholders, including the federal government, would submit misinformation reports. EIP would analyze the report and find similar content across platforms. EIP would submit the report to big tech, often with a recommendation on how to censor. So let's break that down for a moment. It's not just that stuff was presented to some of these agencies and then that specific post was removed. They found examples of sentiment that they didn't like, particularly about the vaccine, but also about elections, politics. And if they could highlight one reflection of a sentiment they didn't like, they used this fused reporting system to then just go try to wipe that sentiment across off of platforms altogether. So back to Jordan. The Judiciary Committee and the Weaponization Subcommittee obtained these non-public documents and information from Stanford only after threat of contempt. And then there's a link to the reports. Who was targeted? Americans of all political stripes, but especially conservatives. And he's got a list here: Marjorie Taylor Greene, Mike Huckabee, the Babylon Bee, Sean Hannity, Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, Jack Posobiec, James O'Keefe, Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin. These are a lot of the channels that people are turning to. Newsmax, even Newsmax, getting hammered. So it was jokes, true information, anything that they were trying to get rid of. Back to Jordan. Who did we miss? Did you have a social media post that was targeted by the EIP? It's clear why at Stanford only produced these after we threatened contempt. The American people deserve to know if they were targeted by their own government and so-called disinformation experts. The committee is making data from these reports publicly available. That's at Jim_Jordan. You can reply. You can be a part of the research team. And the real question after all of this is, are we going to continue to fund it? Because it's one thing writing reports and threatening contempt and sending subpoenas, but if we're still going to send money to the Election Integrity Project through publicly funded universities, through collaborations with the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of State, then we're just paper tigers. We're not actually doing anything to root out the censorship. We're merely diagnosing it. Would you ever go to a doctor who treated you that way? You walk in and they say, we figured out what's wrong with you. It's the flu. Good luck. We looked at all your medical reports. Turns out it's cancer. Oh, you want chemotherapy? You want radiation? You want your treatment? Oh, no, we don't do that. We won't fix the problem. We'll merely identify it. It cannot be the posture of the Republican-controlled House of Representatives. So we have to stop funding to these entities. That's why these single subject appropriations bills I'm working on are so incredibly important. Now I want to get to another big story, and it has to do with Sequoia Capital. So if you think about the uniparty that I've been highly critical of here in Washington, D.C., it requires a lot of money to run it. And so they go to some of the most exquisite and elaborate financial arrangements they can find. And at times, I am concerned that foreign money is working its way into U.S. elections through entities of venture capital, where a lot of times there's not great transparency into those dollars, where they're coming from, how they're commingled with domestic entities, how that can be part of a corrupt political process. So before the 2022 elections, Republican staff on the House Intelligence Committee executed a major investigation into this entity, Sequoia Capital. It's the largest American venture capital fund. It has incredibly detailed ties to China and to the whole FTX Sam Bankman-Fried fiasco. Sequoia is so deeply in bed with the CCP that you're able to draw connections not just from where they get their money from, but where it's going. Sequoia is a major Democratic donor, with its leadership funneling tens of millions of dollars annually to Democrat campaigns and causes. Shortly after the election, Sequoia juiced up its donations to none other than Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell by orders of magnitude. So just an example, there was a $750,000 donation to the Senate Leadership Fund controlled by McConnell, and over $1 million to the McCarthy Victory Fund, and another $500,000 to the National Republican Congressional Committee. That was in 2022 and 2023. So despite internal promises by McCarthy after the election, the Republican staff that worked on the report, they were frog-marched out of the building. And the investigation and report were deep-sixed. But then we fired McCarthy. Immediately following McCarthy's ouster, but before Speaker Johnson was elected, Chairman Gallagher of the China Select Committee announced a long-delayed probe into Sequoia. Now, Speaker Johnson is going after some of the Republican staffers who may have functioned as a go-between between McCarthy and some of the committee work, or even Sequoia itself. This is a good house cleaning, and it needed to happen so that the probe into Chinese influence into American elections and American politics can continue. Republicans have been too cheap a date. After being weak on Sequoia and China for far too long, they've accepted pennies on the dollar compared to what these folks were giving Democrats. And we shouldn't do that. We cannot be beholden to these foreign interests abroad and special interests here at home. And one thing I am really excited about is from Mike Johnson, we see action. The very staffers in the Speaker's office who certainly have been implicated in trying to shape, scuttle, inform on this really important report, they're not in a position to make decisions for the House of Representatives anymore, and that is certainly a good thing. I want to give you an update, as we often do, what's going on in the Middle East right now. Unsurprisingly, Joe Biden is requesting an additional $100 million for aid to Gaza, but we pick up this report from the Washington Examiner. The headline, Israel war, high risk, Hamas could steal Gaza aid, Biden administration watchdog warns. So this comes from the Inspector General at USAID. They're saying that Hamas and other terrorist groups will likely attempt to steal humanitarian assistance that the Biden administration intends to send Palestinians. Biden's announcement calls for this $100 million. And what you hear the IG saying from USAID is that there's not really going to be a governance structure around how this money gets spent. Quoting directly from the IG, there are a number of formal or informal authorizations from armed groups. So you'd be looking at the very armed groups in Gaza, either Hamas directly or functionally directed by Hamas, to distribute aid. That is a crazy idea. The United States has got to get out of funding both sides of every conflict in the Middle East. We've been doing it for most of my adult life. And here, even from the Biden administration, saying the $100 million to Gaza would very likely fall into the hands of Hamas. We've been critical of USAID in the past. I've gone to the floor to try to highlight this agency as one that could see reductions in funding in order to help us balance our budget and return to fiscal sanity. I think that we too often believe that spreading U.S. cash all around the world is going to buy us goodwill. The reality is, oftentimes people just think we're fools. I made that argument on the House floor. Take a listen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment reduces the amount of funding allocated to USAID by $4.5 billion. As I've mentioned earlier, USAID is a vehicle through which the American taxpayer pays for economic development in other countries. I think instead we should spend more money on the economic development of our own country. And actually, if we spent less money overall, we probably would see less inflation, more prosperity, and the type of economic growth that we saw during President Trump's time in office. USAID may have started with laudable goals, but today they're promoting abortion globally with American tax dollars. They are pushing President Biden's national gender strategy. I never thought we needed a national gender strategy, but if we need a national gender strategy, can we at least not spend so much money promoting it abroad? Silly. The DEI programs that are embedded in the 1619 Project have been embraced by United Nations Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, and we see that continue to manifest through USAID. American taxpayers should focus their resources and their efforts on the American people and the American economy. This is a thoughtful reduction. It should be easily agreed to, and I reserve the balance of my time. We are back live, and folks on our Getter stream think that it should be the rich Middle Eastern countries that provide the humanitarian assistance to Gaza. There's good logic behind that. And Keith on Facebook says, no continuing resolutions and no ladder. Have you guys heard about the ladder concept? It's all the rage right now in the halls of Congress. And I'm going to maybe take issue with Keith's instant rejection of this. So here's how the appropriations process is broken. Since the mid-90s, our entire government is funded with one up or down vote all at once for every agency. And so one of the ways that you deconstruct that system is to say, look, even if you're extending government funding for, say, pay for our border patrol, pay for our troops, veterans benefits, care for the vulnerable, you don't have to do that at the same time and for the same duration as every agency of government. So, for example, you could create a laddered or a tiered system where we say, okay, pay for our troops, pay for Border Patrol. We're taking that off the table. We're going to extend those things out until we can get our single subject appropriations bills negotiated with the United States Senate. But like the DOJ, the Department of Education, the EPA, we don't have to extend those out as long as you would extend out troop pay or Border Patrol pay. You can put them quite literally on a short ladder. But then the question becomes, will the House Republican Conference have sufficient courage if the Senate doesn't negotiate in that period of time to allow these mini shutdowns. One thing I could tell you, far too many of my Republican colleagues would literally do anything to avoid a shutdown. They would accept any spending amount. They would accept any compromise on policy. They would do anything to avoid a shutdown. And the Democrats know that, and so they play the minority card with greater leverage as a result. Maybe if you didn't have to shut down the whole government all at once, we could help some of our Republican representatives to find a little backbone. Okay, you don't have the guts to shut down the whole government. Do you have the guts to shut down the Department of Education? Do you have the guts to shut down features of the DOJ that have been turned against the people? Do you have the guts to shut down the ATF for a period of time to bring them into compliance with the law that they think they can make in the absence of Congress? So while Keith is negative on the latter, I am quite open-minded about it. Now, the ladders have to be the right length. They have to have the right consequences. But the way to break the fever in this town is to showcase to people that you don't have to vote for every agency for the same duration all at once at the same time. And once you start putting the cracks in that foundation, I think the entire structure of the uniparty's reign is at risk of falling into some state of collapse. And that's what we're here for. We want the ideas that lawmakers have sincerely representing their constituents to be offered due consideration, particularly when they reduce federal spending. Because if we don't do that, if we get everything else right, and we spend this country into oblivion, there won't be anything left. And so we have to fight with everything we have on that particular front. Also have an update for you regarding the natural world. Many of you may know I love bird watching. It is one of my favorite Florida man things to do. Go out in a canoe, kayak, sometimes off a dock, see the osprey, the eagle. But we now are getting word, pursuant to the latest report from NPR, that the American Ornithological Society has vowed to change the English names of all bird species named after people. So there are about 70 to 80 bird species that have got some sort of connection to the name of the scientist who found them or some other human trait. And the American Ornithological Society believes that that might be offensive or derogatory or not in line with wokeness. So wokeness has literally gone to the birds at this stage of the game. So Anna's hummingbird, Gamble's quail, Lewis's woodpecker, Berwick's wren, Bullock's oriole, all could see their names changed, and the whole goal is to not have them named after any human who might have had an opinion or a sensibility that doesn't stand up to today's standards. It is remarkable when even the names of birds are being changed. We see this alongside cities like Charlottesville taking down statues, and it's always good to add to our understanding, not subtract. I always think that whether it is how we think about a fellow living being in the natural world or how we think about an event in history, we want to use the sharp side of the pencil, not the eraser. Here, 70 to 80 bird species, the woke birds. I guess they're not woke enough. They will be with their new names. We've got a big project coming out of our office regarding how the speaker battle went down. And in the coming days, we will be releasing a film made by Sasha, who directs this very podcast. It is really, I think, illuminating as to the dynamics that unfolded in a really historical moment for the United States House of Representatives. Here is our latest trailer. Listen and enjoy.
This is quite a sight to behold. Kevin McCarthy walking up to Boebert and mainly Gaetz, trying to convince Matt Gaetz to vote yes and not present.
Kevin McCarthy on the brink of the speakership, all in the hands of Matt Gaetz, who is not willing to give it to him.
Did you see Mike Rogers from Alabama?
Mike Rogers of Alabama lunged at Matt Gaetz.
I've never seen anything like this. This is the kind of thing
none of us have.
gavelled out. That will be our next product. We want you to be able to enjoy it. Make sure that you're following us at Rep Matt Gaetz on Twitter or now X. Make sure you are subscribed to our podcast. Turn those notifications on. And do us a favor, if you're listening on Apple, we're like 12 reviews away from 4,500 reviews. So if there's 12 of you out there who will give us 5 stars on Apple iTunes, I would appreciate it. We're going to have more information about some of the oversight work with Special Counsel Weiss. He gave an extended deposition today before members of the House Judiciary Committee. I was there. Jim Jordan was there. The Democrats were there. So we'll have important updates for you regarding that and the ongoing federal budget process. Feels good to be in the fight, doesn't it? I'm glad I'm in it with all of you. Thanks for watching. Roll the credits.